Management Accountant and Chartered Global Management Accountant. Mr. Sarmad graduated from Osmania University in Hyderabad as a Bachelor of Commerce. He is married to a Spanish national and has 2 sons. With this brief introduction, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you, sir. A journalist never retires until he expires. This is a beautiful line I remember from the bio of our beloved 𝗙𝗶𝘁 sir. A warm welcome to you, sir. A warm welcome to our director, Hyder sir, members of the teaching faculty, and my dear students. Thank you.
First of all, 𝗙𝗵𝘁𝗵𝘁. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. And I'd like to thank the Institute of Excellence, especially Mr. Hyder, Mr. 𝗙𝗵𝘁, and the main founder of the Institute, Mr. 𝗙𝗵𝘁, for inviting me and to give this opportunity. So it's a great pleasure. Can you hear me well?
I think it's light.
Yeah. I just want to make sure, yes.
This is better.
Very good. And to also the principal and all the teachers of the institute and all the faculty and the administrators, the many workers who manage this facility to provide this excellent environment in which all of you, the students, especially the students, have an opportunity to learn. Learning is a continuous journey that we all must strive. I just picked 2 quotes that I have used throughout my career, and that is to do with excellence, because since this is the Institute of Excellence. So in my understanding, excellence is not a destination to arrive at, but a path of continual attention and improvement, always, until we finish off. And also, excellence is the gradual result of always striving to do better, no matter what. Even just a small act to do better, to improve oneself, that's what excellence is all about. So this institute is the right place for all of you, that you are here, and I wish you all the very best. I'll share a few thoughts and remarks about where I work and how I got to where I got to. So first of all, my name is Ovais Sarmad, and I'm from Hyderabad. And I left Hyderabad about 40 years ago to become an accountant. So I studied in London for a few years, and then from there I got a job offer with the organization called the International Organization for Migration, which is based in Geneva in Switzerland. So there I worked for 27 years in many different capacities. And that organization is a UN organization, United Nations organization, dealing with migration of people around the world. And for those of you who probably don't know, there are about 5% of the global population of 7 billion people are migrants. Migrants of different kinds. The most important, the ones we know, are the migrants who live in the Middle East, for instance, from India. And then there are many other migrants from different parts of the world who live in different places from where they have been born. They were born. I'm a migrant living right now in Germany. So this organization was managing everything to do with migration and the migratory flows of human beings from different parts of the world. So I spent 27 years there. And after that, then I joined the current organization, which is the United Nations Climate Change Organization, based in Germany, in Bonn. Bonn was the former capital of Germany. So that's where I work right now, as the Deputy Executive Secretary. Now, what that means, I'll briefly tell you. But first of all, you all have received a printout of what I wanted to share with you. And I assumed that all of you would have read about the United Nations. You must have heard about the United Nations. And often, and that applied to me as well when I was growing up, like you and as a student, when we hear about United Nations, we think it's one organization or one entity based in New York in the United States, and they take several decisions. That is not true. United Nations is a system of many organizations. The most visible of that is the General Assembly and Security Council that is based in New York. The General Assembly brings all the 194 countries of the world to discuss various issues that face the humanity at large, global issues, and to find solutions for it. And then there is the Security Council. Now, historically, I would like you to study that when you have some time. Security Council of the United Nations has 5 permanent members: the United States, China, Russia, France, and United Kingdom. And why those countries? Because those were the countries who ended or came out victorious after the Second World War. So they were the founding members of the United Nations, and they have the permanent seat in the Security Council. And that has become a big issue, a political issue right now, because those 5 countries no longer represent the global community that we all belong to. For instance, India or no country from Africa is represented at the Security Council in a permanent way. So that is another aspect of the United Nations that we all should be aware of. And then there are many other organizations within the United Nations system dealing with every aspect of socio-economic, humanitarian, peace, security, environment, justice. So every aspect, there is an organization that is dedicated to just that cause. And they are based in many parts of the world, mostly in headquarter locations. And the headquarter locations are in the United States, in New York. Geneva is another big United Nations headquarters. Then it's Vienna. Then it's Nairobi. And then there are several other smaller headquarters locations. So there are several organizations that are located there. And then United Nations also has a country office in every country of the world, including in India, of course, mostly based in Delhi, but then they have offices in different parts of the country. And then each of the United Nations office in the country works with the government, with the civil society, with the people to address the issues that the country faces. The issues of, as I said, be it humanitarian, socio-economic development, peace, security, justice, and general development. So that's what those offices help the countries to work and achieve those goals. And in that regard, if you have not looked at it, I would strongly recommend you to look at something referred to as Sustainable Development Goals. These are very important goals, universal goals, that all countries of the world have agreed to in 2015 and adopted those goals. Those goals were adopted to make the world a better place, to prevent hunger, to protect natural resources, to have better oceans, clean oceans, and there are many other aspects of those sustainable development. Basically what it means is that the 7 billion people around the world, we need, as individuals, human beings, all of us, we need certain resources. We need energy, we need electricity, we need water, we need food, we need space, we need house. So how those resources are to be managed in a responsible way. So the Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17 goals, are meant to provide every country a framework and an institutional policy on how to manage those resources. And that is an extremely important framework that I strongly recommend you to look at and study to the extent you can. So that's so much about in general about the United Nations. And other aspect of the United Nations is preventing catastrophes, preventing wars, or when wars or conflict happen, to help people get out of it, or to provide humanitarian support, food, shelter, medicines, vaccinations, in many, many, many parts of the world. Fortunately, in India, we are relatively fortunate that we do not have crises such as sometimes experienced in other parts of the world like Iraq or Afghanistan recently, or in some places in Africa, where there are no stable governments, where they do not have enough to eat or not enough water. That's where the United Nations goes and provides those resources, provides those services to the populations. So that is the general role and principle of the United Nations. As you will see in the handout that I gave you, there is something referred to as the United Nations Charter. So every UN organization has to abide by that charter. If you like, it's the constitution of the United Nations. I just extracted a small piece of that, but there is a longer version of it. And again, I would request the Institute here to get some copies of it and put it in the library so that you can all refer to it. So basically the Charter requires the member states, when we say member states, these are the governments, to maintain international peace and security, uphold international law, achieve higher standards of living in a responsible way, and address economic, social, health, and related problems, and to promote universal respect for and observance of human rights. Human rights are extremely important. That is another thing which is a cornerstone of what the United Nations does and stands for. Human rights. We all have rights. Rights to freedom, rights to religion, rights to expression of what we believe in, right to food, security, shelter. Those are the basic human rights. And governments are required to provide that. Where they don't, or if there is any hindrance, then there are organizations, the United Nations, who provide guidance or actions against those countries, against those societies which abuse the human rights of people. And then there are many funds and programs and specialized agencies of the United Nations, and then something referred to as treaty bodies. So United Nations also adopts certain treaties, and that's where I come to the climate change. Now, where I work. So in 1992, all countries of the world realized that there is something seriously wrong with the environment. And the atmosphere that we are used to is becoming unstable. When I say unstable, that it is warming much more rapidly than in the previous several thousand years. And why is that? And it was determined by the scientists, many scientists around the world. They found it was because of human interference with the atmosphere. That we as humans, we were not using the resources in a responsible way. And how is that? That means we were burning too much of fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal, and we are using the resources in a very irresponsible manner. So when those fumes or greenhouse gas emissions are emitted in the atmosphere, they remain there forever. They never go out. So right now, those emissions have made the atmosphere like a greenhouse. So more and more carbon emissions that are emitted because of the burning of those fossil fuels, they are trapped in the atmosphere. And that is increasing the global temperatures. So, at that time it was decided that they have to establish a treaty, an agreement that all countries of the world should agree to and work towards reversing that problem and addressing it. So that happened in 1992. And in 1994 that was agreed by all countries and it was adopted. And the organization that I work in was established in Bonn to deal with the issue of climate change. And every year since then, we conduct a conference which is called the COP, Conference of the Parties. Now, the countries in that organization are referred to as parties because not all entities are countries. There are some, like a European Union, which is not a country, it is a group of countries. So therefore they are referred to as parties. So there are 197 parties which belong to our organization, and they adopted the convention in 1992, adopted in 1994, to establish a clear framework of what needs to happen to limit the greenhouse gas emissions and limit the global temperature rise. So every year they meet and they discuss, they negotiate. Now what do they negotiate? What they negotiate is, and this is very important for all of us to understand, because this greenhouse gas emissions that I mentioned, the burning of fossil fuels because of heavy industrialization, that was done by mostly the rich countries. The rich countries are the European Union countries, UK, Germany, France, Switzerland, Italy, United States. So they became very rich, and through the industrialization, by building their infrastructure, by building their houses, by achieving a very high standard of living. So they emitted a lot of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. But now, the problem of that was being felt by countries who did not do anything, especially smaller countries in the islands. They did not do, they did not burn fossil fuels, but the impacts of that fossil fuel burning is still being felt by the smaller countries, the not so rich or poorer countries, the so-called developing countries. So all those countries get together, and what they negotiate is that the poorer countries, the smaller countries, ask the richer countries to provide financial resources, financial flexibility, including technology, to the poorer countries. And that's where the negotiations happen every year. And that is at a very high level, political level, to make those negotiations. And through those negotiations, over the years, there were several agreements that were adopted. One of the key agreement was the Kyoto Protocol. It was referred to as Kyoto Protocol, that was adopted in Japan. That was meant to ask the richer countries to offset their carbon emissions by providing incentives to the poorer countries. And that helped, that worked for a certain number of years. But still, despite all of that, the temperatures were rising. Global temperatures were rising, and everywhere in the world, people were seeing the impacts of climate change. More floods, more drought, more hurricanes, more unstable weather conditions. As a result of that, many people lost their lives, their livelihoods, their houses, the food, the security. So there was an urgent need to finalize another agreement. So all countries started working again to find a common ground, common understanding of what can be done. And that happened after many years of negotiations in 2015, when a very famous agreement was adopted, and that is referred to as the Paris Agreement. And this is how it goes. And you can find that also on the internet. So in 2015, the Paris Agreement was adopted by all countries of the world. Now, very briefly, what does this agreement say? It is based on the scientific evidence of what was happening to the atmosphere, to the weather, to the global warming. So the Paris Agreement agreed, all the countries of the world, all countries, they agreed that they should do everything possible to limit the global warming to not more than 2 degrees Celsius. Preferably 1.5 degrees as compared to the pre-industrial age, so about 100 years. And when? By the end of the century. Now, this time frame may look very long, but it is not, because of the impacts. Even in Hyderabad, you see, last year or year before, there were huge, very, very severe floods. And every year, the temperature is rising. And when that happens, then it would become almost impossible to live in cities, in places where it becomes very, very hot. Not only that, when it becomes hot, the whole earth, remember there are 2 ice caps of the world, the North Pole and the South Pole, which has huge ice caps. So when the whole atmosphere warms, the ice melts. And where does the melting water go? In the oceans. And that raises the level of oceans. So there are many countries in the world, especially the small island countries, they are now drowning. Or the cities which are on the shores of the seas, they're seeing huge problems by the rise of water levels. So that is a huge problem. So what the Paris Agreement said was, limit the global warming to not more than 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. Now here is an important point. Where are we now? In 2021, last year, the global warming was already 1.1 degrees. And we see the effects of 1.1 degrees already now in many, many parts of the world. Even the rich countries, United States and Europe, they're seeing many floods, fires, drought, and many problems. And they are losing billions and trillions of dollars as a result of that. And if the same level of irresponsible use of resources continues, we will see the temperatures rise to 1.5 degrees by next 10 to 15 years. And that is very, very dangerous. Now we went through the pandemic, the COVID pandemic for the last 2 years, and it was quite serious, and we all suffered as a result of that. And fortunately there is a vaccine for the pandemic, for the COVID, and hopefully this year or by the end of this year, we should all hopefully come out of it safely. But for climate change, there cannot be a vaccine. So we have to do something very urgently, very rapidly to prevent the threat of climate change. It will be a pandemic, maybe 100 or 1,000 times worse than the COVID pandemic. So that is how serious it is. Now, sometimes this is not conveyed in a very clear way in the media when we hear about it, but I have personally seen the impacts of climate change. As I said, the impacts of climate change as the fires, the droughts, the flooding, but as a result of that, people have to be displaced. They don't have a place to live. They have to move. They have to go to other countries. They become migrants and they become refugees. And they lose their livelihoods. You must have seen in many newspapers, there are migrants who undertake very dangerous journeys in many parts of the world, in the Mediterranean, in between South and North America, in the Sahara Desert, to run away from what is happening as a result of climate change. We don't see that, unfortunately, in many parts of India, but it's not far away. If the global temperature keeps rising, it will happen everywhere. Like, for instance, where I live, in Bonn, in Germany, no one could have imagined. About 6 months ago, they were flooding. Small rivers flooded like never ever before. And many, many people lost their homes, and the infrastructure was completely destroyed. So many rich countries, they felt they were safe, that these things would not happen to them. This would only happen to small island countries or poorer countries or somewhere in Africa. But this is now happening in also many of the rich countries, United States as well. So it has become a big issue. So we all have to be aware of that, what is happening and why it is happening. So now, what do we need to do? We all need to do our part. All of you. First of all, to understand the issue, understand what the problem is, and to do what you can. And there I would strongly recommend you to, first of all, study the issue about climate change, about environmental protection, about the use of natural resources, and how you can help the societies in which we live, and through the societies raise your voice, join groups, and then that voices will be heard by the politicians, and very soon you will be able to vote, and then you have to vote to the parties who provide better protection for environment and use of natural resources. And recently, if you have watched the news or read the news, in many parts of the world, the youth, the young people like you, have realized that this is a very, very serious problem. My life almost is finished. I have gone through, I'm 61 years old now. So, but you are very young, you still have a long life to go. And if this situation gets worse, it is your future that is in jeopardy, that you will have many issues, many problems. So therefore, many people in the world, many youth, young people, you must have heard of Greta Thunberg from Sweden, who started this movement. And now there are many millions of children around the world who are raising their voice to say to the older generation and to the countries and to the big rich countries to say, stop using fossil fuels, stop burning coal, stop burning petrol, gas, oil, and move to renewable energies, because it is their future, it is your future that those people are not taking care of, the governments are not taking care of. Now, as a result of that, last year's conference in 2021, it was held in Glasgow, the climate conference. And every country, once again, they got together, including the Prime Minister Modi was there, and all the big leaders were there, they once again committed that they will prevent the rise of temperatures above 1.5 degrees. They committed, they promised, but they still have to make it happen. And that is still a big challenge for every country. Because the challenge is for the countries like India or China, there are still about, in India, 200 million people without electricity, without shelter, and they are very poor. So the government has to provide them with the energy, with the electricity, with all the resources that they need. So countries like India say, well, wait, we need money, we need resources, we need technology. And everybody has now agreed. So every year from 2020 onwards, the rich countries will provide $100 billion to poorer countries to help them adapt to the impacts of climate change and move to renewable energies. Now, I mentioned renewable energies. I hope you all know the sources of renewable energies, because we don't have to use oil, gas, or coal for the needs of our energy. But unfortunately, governments and many companies of the world, Reliance and Tatas and major companies, they have a huge lobby because they have business interests, so they will not stop doing this. Until you, all of you, say, I will not use any product which is made by burning fossil fuels, coal, gas, oil, petrol, diesel. You have to say that. And that you will not put money in any product that destroys or harms the environment. That's the only way it can happen. So anyway, back to the last conference. So all countries agreed. And now it's the time, from now until the end of this decade, by 2030, every country of the world has to take very drastic actions to move away from fossil fuels to renewable energies. Renewable energies are wind. Wind is everywhere. Solar, sun. Hydroelectric, water. And geothermic. Geothermic is drilling deep down in the earth to release the energy. So these are natural, clean sources of energy. And today we have all the technology, we have all the infrastructure to move to those renewable energy sources for all the needs around the world, including in India. But it takes time. And we in our organization working day and night to shorten that time so that we move to the sources of renewable energy. And that is happening slowly, but surely it is happening. Like for instance in all of Europe, by the end of 2030, which is 8 years from now, there will no longer be any more cars running on petrol or diesel. They will all be electric cars. India is going in the same direction, but it will take more years. And many countries in the world have stopped using coal. India, unfortunately, has not. Because India still needs to burn a lot of coal to provide the energy. So we are helping countries like India, China, Brazil, and others. So that is one very important action that needs to happen. Another one is, because all that greenhouse gas emissions that I mentioned that is in the atmosphere, it can be absorbed, it can be taken away from the atmosphere. And how is that possible? These are the forests around the world, the Amazon forest and many forests in India. They absorb the carbon which is in the atmosphere. So that means we have to increase the land mass, the land that is available around the world to increase forestation, to grow more forests, so that the forest can absorb those carbon emissions which are present in the atmosphere. And now there is a new technology which is called the carbon capture and utilization and sequestration. It's a difficult word, but these are huge machines, maybe 10 times the size of this building. And those machines are sucking or vacuuming carbon from the atmosphere and burying that deep in the earth. And that is happening in many parts of the world. Saudi Arabia is the biggest country which has the largest carbon capture, utilization and sequestration. So they capture the carbon and put it in the earth. So that is what is happening. So my message to all of you, dear students, is the revolution. You must have heard of many revolutions, the Industrial Revolution. I strongly believe that we are right now living through a major revolution of moving away from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. So the more you make yourselves aware or study environmental science, studies about climate change, and become experts in the production, management, and distribution of renewable energies, those will be the careers for future. And if you're able to do that, and I would strongly recommend you to look at the websites of the organization that I belong to, UNFCCC.int. Once again, I request the Institute administrators and Madam Principal to expose the students to those sources of information. And those organizations, now these are the organizations, UNFCCC, that's the organization that I belong to, United Nations Climate Change. Then there is another organization, United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. Then there is another organization, United Nations Development Program. These organizations, they all have internship opportunities for graduates. So you should register once you get out of this institute and you become a graduate. But before that, you should refer to those organizations and see what is happening in terms of environmental management and climate change actions and changes towards renewable energy, and select your careers, or whatever career you are involved in, engineering, medicine, finance or administration. The learning of environmental protection or environmental integrity, that education will be very, very important, in addition to other professions that you will choose, because that will become very, very important. So that is the trend that is happening. I would like to use another example. For instance, you're what, 20 years or less than 20 years? Maybe you might remember 20 years ago, a lot of people used to smoke cigarettes in public places. I was a smoker. I stopped many, many years ago. But now you see in many public places, in restaurants and even in public parks, it is not so common, or it is prohibited to smoke. And why? Because people have realized that smoking is bad for our health. So that mindset change happened in not such a long time, 15, 20 years. And that is what is happening with the transformation and changes from the fossil fuel burning sources of energy to the sources of energy which are renewable energy sources. And that is happening. In the next 5, 10, 20 years, we will all know where are we getting this electricity from, and how that is being used. And it will be obligatory to report and to prevent that environmental damage societies are creating. So once again, I'd like to also request the Institute authorities to provide access to some of that information which is available on the internet. And there are other two sources which is called Race to Zero and Race to Resilience. Now this is something interesting for all of you to know. As a result of those decisions, our organization started a race for private sector companies to also adopt and agree on the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius, that they remain within that target and they don't make pollution, they don't burn fossil fuels. So many companies in the world now, including many big companies in India, the Tatas and the Reliance and Bajaj and others, they have all now, Mahindra is another big company, and Apple, Google, all of those companies have now committed that they will become net zero by 2030. That means they will not use sources of energies that are detrimental to the environment. So that is extremely important. Therefore, I go back to the point about learning about environmental protection, so that those companies in 10 years will require the graduates who will be looking for jobs in those companies to say, are you committed to the environmental protection? Similar to, do you smoke? If you smoke, you can't get into some of those companies. So that is what is happening now. So once again, I encourage all of you to learn and become aware and hopefully get some studies in those areas. So I would like to end there, and what I would greatly appreciate if you don't feel shy about it, to ask questions, to think about what I just said. If there is anything which is not clear, or you have not been able to follow or understand, because I know this sometimes can be very confusing or a heavy subject, but I hope I was able to convey the problem that we face and where that problem is coming from and what are the solutions and where we are all heading towards, individually, as a society, in a city, or a country. So it will be up to you to grow up, to take on that challenge, to learn about it, and to become the future leaders of the world, of the organizations or politics or wherever it can be done. And here is my personal message to you. When I started studying and deciding what to do, I never thought that I would work for United Nations, or I will work for climate change, or before that migration. But what I did was, I worked very, very hard. There is no replacement to working hard and remaining committed to improve. As I mentioned when I started, to be committed to excellence in everything that you do. When you open a book, when you start studying, when you're listening to a lecture in the classrooms, think about it, that you want to be excellent. And excellence is not a destination, it is a continuous journey that you have to continuously strive for every day, every minute. That's what I try to do, and it seemed to have worked. And to be very sincere and honest to yourself first about what you wish to do and how you want to get there. And Last, never take no for an answer from anybody. Never. If anybody says, this is a challenge, you can't do this, or you can't do that, this is more difficult, or you shouldn't go there, or you shouldn't try that. If anything is good, and you are able to contribute to something or learn, do it. Never stop. And be very, very ambitious in your goals, in your efforts to excellence. So that's what I would like to say, and I hope you were able to get some useful information, and the printout that I gave you, study that, and the references that I shared with you, and with the help of Madam Principal here and the teachers in your next classes or in the library, refer to those links that I shared, and hope that you will have, I'm sure you will have, a very, very bright and a successful future career ahead of you. Use the time that you have now in a good way, in a wise way, because later on you will have plenty of time to go and do other things. But now is the time for you to study and be the excellent candidate and the student that you all have come here for. So thank you very much. I would like to tell my Madam Principal here, unfortunately I did not come prepared for this lecture, but I'd like to give you my copy of the Paris Agreement and our annual report, so that you can... So any questions from anyone? Don't be shy.
Come along, boys.
Bring that mic here.
Maybe I would give a read.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah,
Because
even I would like to have.
you mentioned about how optimistic you think India is going to be able to keep that 1.5, because we have over 8,000 coal mining projects going on, and there's a population of 1.3 of 2 billion, and automobiles are 3 million automobiles moving in the streets of India. And we are eating away our forests. So maybe these boys, they might take a proof from that, and you might be able to answer them how it's going to happen in India. How optimistic are you about this?
I'm generally very optimistic, because I have to be, because if I'm not, then I won't be able to do the job that I do. So in the case of India, I met Prime Minister Modi, and we had a good conversation. So he asked me what do I advise him about India's promise to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. And he committed that it will be done by 2070, which is still a long way away. But that is just a target. But before that, there is still a lot that is happening in India. India is now one of the largest producers of energy through solar. And India also has the International Solar Alliance now, headquartered in Delhi. This is a very important organization. Another thing that you all should look at. ISA, International Solar Alliance. You must have heard of OPEC, which is the Organization for Petroleum that is based in Vienna, which they trade oil around the world. So India will have an International Solar Alliance where they will trade solar energy of the world. So India has the potential, and India also knows that they have to protect their forests, especially the mangrove forests in Sundarbans and in those places in many parts of the world. So I believe they are doing it. But India is a big democracy, and federal states. Some are more progressive than others. Bombay is very progressive. Pune is also very progressive, but other states are not so much. So our job in our organization is to work closely with those countries, including India, and not to turn them away. And another important role that we play is to connect countries like India with other countries where there is technology, as I said, carbon capture, and provide the provision of funding. And this funding is huge. It's big funding that comes. So we provide that. So I remain hopeful that in the next 10 years, that target of 2070 will come down to maybe 2050 by 20 years. I absolutely believe if I was in their shoes, I would be looking at that future in which I will be working in areas of renewable energy and transition towards renewable energy.
Mr. Ovais, a related question about the future of the boys you were talking of is, do you think there is this resistance by the working class who work in the mines and the oil drilling fields towards this process of climate change?
That's a very good question, Haider. Yes, absolutely. That is because there are many millions of people in all parts of the world who are currently employed in coal mines, in petroleum industry, in gas and petrol stations here and making cars, steel industry, which requires a huge amount of burning of fossil fuels. Yes, absolutely. So if you tell them that you will have to, your job will be in jeopardy. So again, in our organization, in the process, 2 years ago, there was a decision taken by all countries of the world that there should be a just transition. A just meaning just and equitable transition for those workers who are currently in those areas of work, and they will be reskilled. They will be provided with new technologies and training and education to move to other sources of energy, and that is happening already. UK, for instance, and United Kingdom, there are no more coal mines. And there were many workers who used to work in coal mines, or the cities were built around the coal mines. In Poland as well, I have seen it myself. And they have completely transitioned to other sources and other jobs. And that is happening gradually in other parts of the world. So there is an agreement which calls for just transition. So that is already happening. But you're right, it cannot happen from one day to the next. And the big country which is in some trouble, difficulty is Saudi Arabia and most of the Middle East countries, because their economies are completely based on oil production. So you will see now Saudi Arabia is opening up. They are becoming a tourist destination, and they are installing the largest solar energy grid stations, because they know that they won't be able to drill as much oil for the next, 50 to 20, 30 years, even if they have it, because there won't be a demand for it. And we are seeing that. Another thing that you will see is Kodak company, the camera. They used to be those films, they've gone out of business, right? Because now we have cameras here and you get a photo immediately. And that is what is happening. That's what I talked about, the transformation and the revolution that we are living through. Because we are living through, we don't realize it, but it is happening. So those big companies who are exploiting fossil fuels, they will become Kodaks of the future.
Questions?
Yeah, you have a question there. You want this mic?
Okay, yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, is it possible that if we stop coal mines in whole world, we can get over control on increasing global temperature and climate changes
Sorry, can you repeat that? If we stop coal mines,
in the world?
yes.
Can we get some control over increasing global temperatures?
Not completely, because coal accounts for possibly about 20% of the global carbon emissions. So it will prevent 20%, but the rest of it comes from oil, gas, and another very important source from where the global greenhouse gas emissions come is farming, agriculture. So yes, if you stop coal completely from one day to the next, there will be a reduction, a big reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions by about 20% of the total, but still not enough.
Do we have any other alternative energy source which can fill the requirements of coal energy?
Yes, as I mentioned, there is wind. You see these wind farms and solar, hydro, which is water, and geothermal. Those are the main alternate sources of energy.
Thank you, sir.
Please.
Good afternoon, sir. What will be the major impact of the temperature rising, sir? Above 2 degrees, what will the major impact?
It would be difficult to point to just one major impact. I am afraid if the global temperatures rise above 1.5 or break 2 degree barrier, I don't think we'll be able to sit here like this. It will be inhabitable, and we will not have the species. Many animals in the world will disappear. There will be huge hurricanes or floods, and it will become, if the summers here, in summers the temperatures go to what, 45, 46 degrees? Right? It depends on where it is. And so there are already some countries in the world where the temperatures are more than 50. So if that happens, maybe 6 to 8 months of the year you won't be able to even go out. So it would be quite disastrous. As I said, the COVID pandemic caused a lot of trouble in the last 2 years. And if the temperatures rise above 2 degrees, it will be maybe 100,000 times worse than the pandemic. So there are many, and droughts. Drought means there won't be agriculture, there won't be food, grains in many parts of the world, and that would create famine, massive deaths. So yeah, there will be huge implications.
As you mentioned, 17 goals of sustainable.
Yeah.
So that from those goals, tell me those goals which we can now able to do.
Okay, out of those 17 goals, everyone it is being implemented. All of those. You can look at it. Goal number 13 is to do with climate action, climate change, and there are 180 targets for those goals that each country has to meet. And when I say each country, countries are not empty. Countries are made of people, of you and me and everybody. So we all have to do our part.
Thank you, sir.
So these fires in Australia, Greece, and Turkey were the cause of climate control change.
Sorry, Australia?
The fires in Australia, in the Blue Mountains, they're all fire in Turkey and Greece.
Bushfires.
Bushfires.
Are they directly linked to climate change? The answer to that is it's complicated because those fires happen all the time. but the intensity, the regularity, and the vastness of those fires have now increased significantly by almost 100 times. And the scientists have been able to prove that that is as a result of global warming, and that global warming that is being created by human behavior. So yes, there is an indirect link. So those things happen. Floods happen, hurricanes happen, but the intensity of it has increased 100-fold because of that greenhouse gas emission, greenhouse gas effect. The greenhouse gas effect is like a vacuum or a pressure cooker. So every element of the greenhouse gas that is put in the atmosphere by burning of fossil fuel, coal, you drive the car, it remains in the atmosphere. It has nowhere to go. So it is becoming like a vacuum. So anything that happens within that vacuum is just very intense. And the science is very, very clear about it.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is, do you think that during lockdown, during COVID pandemic, have affected the climate change?
How?
Lockdown during COVID pandemic, how changed the climate?
Yes, that's a good question. Over the last 2 years, there was a small dip in the emission, the greenhouse gas emissions, but very little, very minor, because the electricity, that generation, and the coal mines and everything else that was still being carried out. So there are some cities like in Delhi and possibly in Hyderabad, we saw a little bit of lesser pollution, but in terms of global warming, no. So there again, another very good source of information is something referred to as 𝗙𝗵𝘁, which plots the effect of greenhouse gas emissions for the last 50 years on a daily basis, on a live basis. So that monitored what happened during the pandemic over the 2 years. Did it make a difference? So there was a very small minor drop, and then it is back again.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, developing a country is interrelated with the using of resources.
Can you repeat?
Developing a country is interrelated with using of their resources.
Develop.
I put it in a better way. Do countries need their resources in fossil fuels for their development?
Yes, absolutely. They need the resources. They need financial resources to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Absolutely. So countries like Bangladesh or some of the island countries, Mauritius or Maldives, they get significant funding from global institutions like the Green Climate Fund or Global Environment Facility to help them adapt to the impacts of climate change. I hope that.
Sorry, sir, sorry. Then which countries should have the developed countries or developing countries?
Yes, absolutely, and that's what I mentioned. That they have committed to provide $100 billion every year. Yes, what they have promised. So last year in Glasgow, when we had the conference, they reached 87 billion. They reached 87, but we still have some way to go, 100 billion. So that money is provided by rich countries to the developing countries through two facilities. One is called the Green Climate Fund, and the other one is Global Environment Facility. So that's where they provide the funds, and the developing countries provide projects, viable projects, to those facilities, and they get funding from it.
Then how far it have to be dependent on others?
How far the countries have to be dependent on others? Yes, there is an interdependence, but largely it is up to those countries to manage and adapt to the impacts of climate change. So if you take a small country, like an island country that I was, it's Tuvalu. Tuvalu is in the Pacific, a small island country. Half the island already has drowned underwater. So the people from that country are migrating to either Australia or New Zealand, or moving to higher places in that country. And that cannot happen without the resources. So they have to rebuild the infrastructure from the low-lying area to the higher areas, and to provide the skills for those people who need to migrate to other countries so that they go and work in other countries. And that is happening in many, many countries of the world, unfortunately.
Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I have a question. As you said, the temperature is increasing year by year. So can you suggest some of the measures so that the poorer of the society can implement on it, so that the temperature may be decreased?
Yeah, as I said, we all have a part to do. So one simple measure that I would recommend for all of you to consider is something is referred to as reuse and recycle. When you need something, whatever it is, clothes, whatever, food, think about what that product, where that product came from, and how it was brought to you. And if that shows you that had created, or it was produced by a company which has not been responsible in managing the natural resources, don't buy it. And many of us have become used to buying new products. But before buying a new product, think about reusing, recycling. Recycling also the waste. Those are simple things that we can do. And one other thing that I mentioned already, to join the movements, form small groups to understand the issue and talk about it. And then when you finish studies here, you will go out in the bigger societies and so raise the voice so that the politicians hear what the younger generation is asking for.
Thank you, sir.
The mic here? Yeah, please.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Alaikum salam.
Sir, I have a question that there are some creatures named as businessmen who would like the businessmen of oil. As there are in laws after being, we are implementing this type of policies, then what are the steps that they are going to take, and how do we tackle that steps?
Can you again repeat your question?
My question is, there are some creatures named as businessmen, like the businessmen of oils and the fossil fuels. They will, as we are implementing this type of policies, as they are becoming in laws, they will try to tackle these problems. So how do we tackle their strategies?
In the businesses, you mean?
Yes, sir.
Okay, in the businesses, what needs to happen is every business has a supply chain of their business requirement, whatever it is. If they're producing something or if they are offering a service to the clients, there is a business process, and that business process is linked to their supply chain. That means there are suppliers, there are products who make the products, there are people who manage, and their clients. So those companies, those businesses have to look at the entire supply chain, the entire process of their business, and see and commit to remove anything that is damaging the environment. And they have to commit to it and report. And the governments are now more and more requiring that reporting to be made in line with the commitments that countries have taken in the climate change process.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yep.
To get out of the global warming completely, it will take much time. can take generations, then how we can save ourselves from that rapid changes?
Yeah, that's a good question. How can we save ourselves, right? As I said, all the actions that I mentioned to you, we all have to do our part and raise our voice and become very, very knowledgeable about this issue and convey that to everybody around you and change our habits already. That's what we have to do.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that was the last question.
Thank you very much, sir. It was very motivational.
Thank you very much. Thank you again.
Now I invite Master 𝗄𝗶𝗵𝘁, Head Boy of Hyderabad Institute of Excellence, Junior College, to present a memento to our esteemed chief guest as a token of our love and appreciation.
Thank you very much, Head Boy, for presenting the memento. Now, I call upon Master Rehan Basha to present vote of thanks. A very warm and graceful good afternoon to our most valued chief guest, Mr. Ovais Sarmad sir, Management Committee, worthy teachers, council members, and my dear friends. It is my privilege to propose a vote of thanks and the contribution of those who worked hard to make this event. The unthankful heart discovers no mercies, but the thankful heart will always find some heavenly blessings. So, first of all, I would like to thank to our principal, Mrs. 𝗙𝗶𝗁𝗵 ma'am, for giving me this wonderful opportunity, and also the today's guest of honor, Mr. Ovais Sarmad sir, for spending his valuable time with us and sharing his experience and through these years. I would also extend my thanks to my dear friend for such a beautiful cooperation in making this event a resounding success. Once again, I thank everyone for making your presence in a beautiful event to be a grand success. So, thank you one and all.
Every story has an ending, but in life, every ending is a new beginning. No duty is more urgent than that of returning times. Once again, I thank everyone present here for making your support in making this event a grand success. Thank you one and all. Hope we meet soon you once again. Thank you.